Senate will come to order.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arizona.
I recognize the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Ms. Alsobrooks. The Senate Subcommittee on Border Security and Immigration will come to order. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine the devastation that criminal aliens have caused in communities across the United States. In particular, we aim to show the American people how the realities on the ground are very different from the narrative peddled by the mainstream media. Rather than truthfully and honestly reporting the facts, media outlets have spread misinformation, allowing harmful, false rhetoric to dominate the airways. The result of these falsehoods is that radical far-left activists have taken to the street and targeted and demonized the very people who are charged with enforcing the law, laws that Congress has passed, and that would be ICE immigration enforcement officers. The first false narrative I want to address is a claim that illegal aliens are not criminals but law-abiding individuals. Neither the Democrats nor the media are willing to tell the public the truth. That the moment an alien illegally enters the United States, they have committed a crime under the U.S. law to enter the U.S. legally. America is a country of laws, and we expect anyone who wishes to come to our country to obey those laws. Another false narrative peddled by the far left is that illegal aliens are not receiving due process when they are arrested by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. This naturally begs the question, what sort of process are these individuals actually due? The idea that somebody could break our laws, enter our country illegally, and then be entitled to all the rights and privileges of an American citizen is a little far-fetched, to be sure. While the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution applies to all individuals within the United States, illegal aliens are not entitled to the same level of due process as American citizens. The fact of the matter is that by the time any alien has received an order of removal, they have had all the due process they are owed under the law. Most aliens with final orders of removal have been in the immigration system for almost a decade. Many have had the opportunity to have their day in court, the very essence of due process, but they neglected to show up. Another false narrative is that ICE is not targeting the worst of the worst criminals. But the fact of the matter is that as we speak, there are 291,141 criminal aliens in the United States today who have final orders of removal. Just this morning in the Senate Judiciary Committee, a comment was made that ICE is targeting gardeners. Well, 291,141 criminal aliens who are under final orders of removal are still in the United States. For this fiscal year alone, 213,279 criminal aliens with final orders of removal already have convictions, while 78,546 have pending criminal charges. Even more disturbing is the fact that 282,194 of these criminal aliens are still roaming free and not in ICE custody yet. There are many criminal aliens in the United States continuing to commit heinous crimes, even to this day. Some of these criminals are part of transnational criminal networks and organized gangs. All you need to do is look at the posters in this room to see some of the worst criminals ICE has apprehended recently: murderers, rapists, pedophiles, and sex traffickers. One of our witnesses here today, Sheriff Roy Boyd, can attest to the types of crimes he sees, even in Goliad, the Texas county with a population of less than 8,000. The Friday before the July the 4th weekend, Sheriff Boyd's officers arrested a 29-year-old Iranian national who entered the United States illegally, not once, but twice. The first time this criminal committed a violent aggravated felony in Indiana, and while he was charged for the crime, he received a suspended sentence in exchange for his removal from the United States. But his crime spree did not end there. Despite being deported, he returned to the United States again, illegally. And what did he do when he came back? He murdered a man in Galveston, Texas, a murder that was caught on video. Thankfully, he was arrested less than 12 hours later with the murder weapon still in his possession. This crime should never have happened. I want to remind my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that there was a time in the not-so-distant past when they agreed that criminal aliens should be deported. But it seems like amnesia has set in, especially because we now happen to have a president in office who's restored the rule of law and now requires enforcement of existing laws. Recall the deporter-in-chief? That would be President Obama. And who was in charge of immigration enforcement during President Obama's term in office? None other than Tom Homan, President Trump's current border czar. In fact, Tom Homan received a Presidential Rank Award during the Obama administration for his service as the head of ICE's enforcement and removal operations. The laws haven't changed since President Obama was in office. Only the party of the president in office has changed. And today we have a pro-enforcement president who was elected in a decisive victory, winning the Electoral College, the popular vote, and every single swing state. He was elected in part, in large part, I'd submit, because of his pro-immigration enforcement provisions, something 54% of Americans support, including Hispanic Americans in my state, many of whose families have come here lawfully and followed all the rules. American voters know full well that deterrence is an important part of immigration enforcement and preventing the flow of criminal aliens into the United States, which means swift apprehension, detention, and deportation. And that works. The Congress just recently passed what's been called the One Big Beautiful Bill that includes billions of additional dollars for ICE detention facilities and for more personnel to make sure that our laws on the books that Congress passed and were signed into law are actually enforced. The state of Florida has stepped up to the plate recently, helping the administration to open a detention facility that's come to be known as Alligator Alcatraz. I'm hopeful that other states will step up to help in similar ways. If we could find a way to make something like this work in Texas, I would strongly support it. And I'd encourage our governor, as well as Secretary Noem, to explore the possibility of locating future detention facilities in Texas. The far-left activists and the mainstream media who support their efforts continue to fan the flame with their rhetoric and misinformation. This is done with one goal in mind: to do anything and everything to undermine President Trump's domestic agenda, just as they did during his first term. And finally, I'd like to end my remarks with a reminder. We're here today to remind the public of the real tragedy of President Biden's open border policies, the hundreds of victims of criminal illegal aliens, crimes that could have been avoided if the laws on the books had simply been enforced. That's why we have two wonderful angel moms here today. First, Maria Vega, the mother of slain border agent Javier Vega Jr., who was killed August the 3rd, 2014. Javier's angelversary, as Ms. Vega calls the date of his death, is less than 2 weeks away. Javier died nearly 11 years ago, but the fact remains he was murdered by illegal aliens who never should have been in the United States in the first place. I was proud to honor Javier and work with the National Border Patrol Council in the Rio Grande Valley Border Patrol sector to have a Border Patrol checkpoint named in his honor. I also want to welcome Tammy Nobles, the mother of Kayla Hamilton. This is a particularly difficult week for her because Kayla's birthday is July the 24th, this Thursday, and the anniversary of her death is July 27th, this upcoming Sunday. And I'm grateful that she's willing to join us here today and tell her story. Ms. Nobles said the most joyful day for her was when her daughter was born, and the saddest day for her is her daughter's heaven date, July the 27th. Kayla was viciously murdered by an MS-13 gang member who originally entered the United States as an unaccompanied minor and was released into the custody of an unvetted sponsor. We're honored to have both Maria and Tammy with us today to share their stories and tell about the loss of their loved ones and how it continues to impact their lives today. I also want to welcome Victor Avila. Victor knows all too well the price that our law enforcement officers pay just to do their jobs. Victor and his partner were shot by gang members. Victor was seriously wounded and his partner lost his life on that day. I intend to introduce a bill in the Senate to honor Ms. Noble's daughter, Kayla Hamilton. The bill will require that HHS conduct mandatory checks on all unaccompanied minors and bar criminal alien sponsors from being allowed to assume custody of such children. A similar bill was introduced by Representative Russell Fry in the House. You may ask, why is it necessary to pass a law to get Health and Human Services to do mandatory checks on unaccompanied minors and to bar criminal alien sponsors? Well, that's because laws barring that do not currently exist, and we need to make sure that this can never happen again. And now I yield to Ranking Member Padilla to give his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you all for being here. You know, prior to the start of this Congress, for nearly 4 years, I served as chair of this subcommittee with then Ranking Member Quorum, and now our roles have been reversed. So I'm happy to be here as a ranking member under Chairman Quorum's leadership here. For 4 years, though, when I was chair, we held hearings examining everything from immigrants serving in the military and in our healthcare system to America's Refugees Admissions Program and the need to better resource our overwhelmed immigration courts. So today, 6 months after President Biden has left office, we hear Republicans continue to talk about how Donald Trump has solved our border crisis. But you won't be surprised to learn that they're also focusing on, guess what? The Biden border betrayal, that's what they call it. And I suspect that years down the road, they'll continue to point the finger at President Biden. But here's what Republicans won't be saying. That if Donald Trump and Republicans were truly focused on just targeting violent criminals, Democrats would have no objections. I know I've been saying it. If that's really what was going on, there would be no discussion, there would be no debate, there would be no disagreement. You also won't hear Republicans share the data, the fact that a large number of undocumented immigrants in the United States actually entered the United States lawfully and are only currently undocumented because they overstayed their visa, or maybe they entered the country following the rules of the temporary protected status programs outlined by prior administrations, but protections that have been removed, turning a legal immigrant into an undocumented immigrant. You won't hear them share those facts. 6 months into Donald Trump's second term as president, it is increasingly clear who the administration is going after. Just look at how they're doing it. They're raiding workplaces and staking out court hearings. They're going after farmers and farm workers, students and families and business owners, many of whom, other than being undocumented, do not have any violent criminal record, and men who have been living here, contributing to the success of their communities and the country for years and years, if not decades. So none of what we're seeing happening around the country, or very little, is actually targeting criminals. And I'm not asking you to take my word for it. It shouldn't be hard, but it is hard for some to take my word for it. Let's look at the administration's own data. Less than 10% of immigrants who ICE has taken into custody have serious criminal convictions. Less than 10%. Again, don't just take my word for it. This is administration's data. In fact, compared to the first Trump administration, these Donald Trump and Stephen Miller quotas have led to a 500% increase in the number of arrests of non-citizens without criminal records. And as a federal judge ruled less than 2 weeks ago, there is, quote, a mountain of evidence, end quote, showing federal agents are illegally profiling and arresting people based on their race, accents, or work. So no, let's not pretend that this is only about cracking down on violent criminals. This is increasingly about sending armored vehicles and agents in tactical gear into communities to intimidate and sow fear, not to protect. Should also at some point ask the questions about where the resources are being redirected from to escalate the immigration enforcement activities. Because the fact of the matter is, whether they're being diverted elsewhere within the Department of Homeland Security, from the Department of Defense, the Department of Justice, they're being taken away from other critical missions that are critical to our nation's security. Not just white-collar crime. We can have a whole session just about that. How about fentanyl task forces that are now being under-resourced because of these ill-conceived strategies? Now, all this is not just morally wrong. It's also bad for our economy. The people being targeted are often the people who are harvesting our fruit and vegetables, who work in meatpacking plants or in the service industry. The very same group of people who just a few years ago, at the outset of the COVID pandemic, Donald Trump declared essential. And the fact of the matter is, Donald Trump has simply gone too far, and the public is starting to turn against him. A Gallup poll published on July 11th, just a couple of weeks ago, showed a dramatic swing in public opinion, in public awareness and understanding is how it should read. In just the last year, the percent of Americans who think immigration is, quote, a good thing for the country has jumped 15 points to a record high 79%. At the same time, Americans who want to see immigration decreased dropped from 55 to 30%. Americans across the country are rejecting the cruel and indiscriminate treatment of the neighbors they've known for decades. Yet earlier this month, Republicans in Congress rubber-stamped more than $150 billion to fund this administration's disastrous enforcement agenda. $150 billion, not to help hire additional asylum officers that we so desperately need to process the cases and meet the demand on our system. Not $150 billion to ensure that unaccompanied children, for example, some as young as 2 or 3 years old, have legal counsel as they face a judge on their own, with their own future on the line. And not $150 billion to hire additional immigration judges, even as more and more people are detained and the administration is firing immigration judges at alarming rates. Instead, this is additional taxpayer dollars to ramp up the mass deportation raids that have been so poorly executed. They are sweeping up United States citizens, including veterans. And so I do ask, why are we here? What more do you want? It's clear why we're here today. We're here because Donald Trump is scapegoating immigrants. It's always been his outlet. It's long been his way to distract from a massively unpopular agenda, like making the largest cuts to Medicaid in history in order to pay for tax cuts for the rich, and to make ICE's budget larger than the budget of the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, the U.S. Marshal Service, and the Bureau of Prisons combined. This is their break glass in case of emergency option when public sentiment turns against them and their agenda. It hasn't been only about targeting violent criminals, and it's certainly not about fixing or modernizing our immigration system. So Democrats are glad to be here today to help set the record straight. My message to the Trump administration is this: the numbers don't back you up. The heartbreaking stories we hear on a daily basis do not back you up, and the American public doesn't back you up. So I urge this subcommittee and the committee as a whole to please, let's get back to the real work of reforming our immigration system. And with that, Mr. Chair, if I can introduce the minority witnesses.
Let me please ask all of the witnesses to stand, and I'll administer the oath. And we'll do the introductions. If you raise your right hand or repeat after me, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Let the record reflect the witnesses have all answered in the affirmative. Please be seated. I'll introduce the majority witnesses, and then I'll turn it over to Senator Padilla. Tammy Nobles, as you've heard, is the mother of Kayla Hamilton, who was murdered by Walter Javier Martinez, an illegal alien gang member who entered the United States as an unaccompanied alien child from El Salvador. When Kayla was being murdered, she managed to call and left a voicemail on her boyfriend's phone. In the voicemail, you can hear the struggle going on in the background, and Kayla could be heard crying. Martinez can be heard in the voicemail hushing her and near the end telling her, "I'm sorry," in Spanish, while strangling her with a phone cord. After Kayla was dead, Martinez tied her up and sexually assaulted her. Kayla fought for her life that day. She had bruises up and down her arms, her fingers and left side of her face, her back, and down her leg, and deep wounds to her neck from the cord. Victor Avila is a retired ICE Homeland Security Investigation Supervisory Special Agent. As an HSI Special Agent, Victor served on the border and is an accredited diplomat to Mexico, Spain, and Portugal. He advised those governments on complex and wide-ranging criminal investigations, including narcotics trafficking, arms trafficking, human trafficking, financial violations, commercial fraud, and counterterrorism. While he was on official assignment to Mexico, Victor suffered multiple gunshot wounds and survived a violent ambush by the Mexican Los Zetas cartel, where Special Agent Jaime Zapata tragically lost his life in the line of duty. Maria Vega is the mother of former U.S. Marine and Border Patrol Agent Javier Vega, Jr. On Sunday, August the 3rd, 2014, Javier Vega was out with his family when two criminal illegal aliens ambushed him and tried to steal Javier's truck. The two aliens jumped out of the stolen vehicle they were driving and without hesitation or warning began shooting at Javier and his family. The illegal aliens shot Javier in the back and his father in the chest in front of his minor children. Andrew R. Arthur is a resident fellow in law and policy at the Center for Immigration Studies in Washington, D.C. Arthur previously served as staff director for the United States House of Representatives Committee on Oversight and Government Reform, the National Security Subcommittee from January 2015 to September 2016, and was counsel for the United States House of Representatives Committee on the Judiciary in Washington, D.C. from July 2001 to November 2006. Sheriff Roy Boyd is the sheriff of Goliad County, Texas. Goliad is a rural South Texas county with a population of around 1,000, situated about halfway between Houston and Laredo along U.S. Highway 59. Sheriff Boyd has been a police officer for 31 years and retired from the Victoria Police Department and the Victoria County Sheriff's Office prior to becoming sheriff of Goliad County. Sheriff Boyd has also worked as one of the leads on Texas's Operation Lone Star. Senator Padilla.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before introducing the minority witnesses, I do want to take a moment to express my sympathies with Mrs. Vega and Mrs. Nobles for your loss. And on behalf of all my Democratic colleagues, I also reiterate that we denounce violence, particularly violence against law enforcement. So I just want to make sure we are clear where we stand on this side of the aisle. First, I'd like to introduce Alejandro Barranco. Alejandro is a Marine veteran from Orange, California, an older brother to 2 active duty Marines and son to Narciso Barranco. Alejandro's father, Narciso, is an immigrant from Mexico who has lived in the United States for more than 30 years and has never committed a crime in the United States. Today, Alejandro will testify about the violent and outrageous treatment his father experienced at the hands of Border Patrol agents and the betrayal that he feels as a veteran who proudly served his country. Thank you for being here. Next, I'd like to introduce Deborah Fleischhaker. Ms. Fleischhaker has served in several career and political roles at the Department of Homeland Security, as well as ICE, including as ICE's acting chief of staff. Ms. Fleischhaker has also served as ICE's Assistant Director for Regulatory Affairs and Policy and as DHS's Executive Secretary and acting DHS Chief Privacy and Chief FOIA Officer. Ms. Fleischhaker will lean on her extensive experience and understanding of both DHS and ICE operations in her testimony today. Thank you. And finally, I'd like to introduce retired police commander Dr. Giovanni Velis. Dr. Velis served with the Minneapolis Police Department for over 30 years before retiring in 2023. As an officer, he worked with the Drug Enforcement Agency and the Federal Bureau of Investigation task forces, as well as